Hello everyone and welcome back to the Super SOC podcast. I'm Ahmed, the CEO and co-founder of Qevlar AI. Today we will be unpacking one of the most talked about announcements in cybersecurity right now, if not ever, and that's Mythos. And more importantly, we will try to talk about what that actually changes for defenders. And because if you've been following the conversation, you've probably seen two extremes. There is one side that explains that it will literally break cybersecurity, and the other that explains that this changes nothing and that's just marketing, etc., etc. Reality is probably somewhere in between, and the issue is if you get it wrong, the risks can be actually fairly important. And so my guest today is Dave McKenzie, a cybersecurity consultant and founder of Cyber Increment, where he works precisely with companies to build, sometimes to rescue their security strategies and their teams. And he spent over 20 years in the field helping large organizations build their SOC, respond to incidents, and recover from real-world incidents. David, how are you?
I am fine. Thank you for having me up.
It's a pleasure for us to have you. So a quick story before we start talking about the episode. But when the Mythos announcement came out, we actually shared on LinkedIn some thoughts about how we see things within Qevlar. And David actually reached out to me saying, yeah, there is maybe few things missing in the perspective, and that actually literally gave us the idea of this conversation today. And your point, David, was when you look at it from the operational standpoint, from the economic standpoint, there may be something to add to the discussion. And so that's, again, literally what brought us today. And so, David, ready to dive in?
Yeah, sure. Let's go for it.
All right. So, again, everyone saw Mythos and everyone saw the news. Many people freaked out. And I've seen takes like, you must rebuild your whole stack, or it's Armageddon and we're just lost and we cannot do anything. And so that was a little bit extreme. But if I'm a CISO listening to this, from your perspective, David, what should I not overreact to right now? And on the other side, what things do you believe that most people are actually underestimating coming from Mythos?
So it was a great marketing moment by Anthropic to do that, to get how many podcasts, how much LinkedIn space, how much all of it. It's everyone's talking about it. And to be honest, yes, but there is also, that's just one frontier model. Every other one's going to come along behind us and do it, which is one of the other fun issues, which is the fact that it's not just going to be that one, it's going to be everything moving forward. And so we go, right, okay, what do we do? They did make some mistakes, I think, when they did the initial release, because in cybersecurity, we like to look at understanding the risks, and we try to figure out, if you put a number in front of us, we ask how you got it and how did you get there, and we try to challenge the logic. And so, by the way it was done was that there was bits and pieces, because obviously whenever you're doing an announcement or talk, there's only so much you can fit in that time period. So things were left out, which then meant we all started filling the gaps with assumptions, with fear, with dismissal. Everybody had their own take on it, and everybody wanted to go off and talk about it. And so you're right, okay. And so subsequently, they have released more information, and they have started. So some of the initially was that, all right, why are we paying $20,000 worth in tokens to crash a Linux box that we could probably do anyway? That, hang on, that doesn't make financial sense. What attacker is going to spend that amount of money? But then it does, that branches off in the conversation around how people don't understand how to procure AI services like this anyway, because the entire model isn't mature enough for us to actually buy at scale these things and understand what we're getting. So there's a whole bunch of problems and interesting things there. But on the Mythos front was, right, okay, they found a whole bunch of issues, but they only talked about one, and then they said this is the amount of money. And so it took that amount of money to find that one issue. And then they came back and went, oh no, we found all these other problems. In fact, there's a few that were worse, but this one's like the most interesting one to be able to demonstrate. So that's why we talked to you. Like, right, oops. Really, what Mythos means for us is that we are running into that world where everything's getting faster and faster and faster, and that's not news really. So as people start to analyze what Mythos can do, there's so UK AI Security Institute. So how we in the UK are kind of, like analyzing these things at a government level. They're like, okay, there's a 73%, like I wrote it down because like numbers, 73% success on expert level CTF tasks and the first completion of a 32-step corporate network attack simulation in a lab setting. And you're like, again, let's go like English for real people and business leaders. Like, what does that mean? What does it mean is it can string things together. It can take one small issue that you manage to find and then string it and string it and string it. And that is probably the biggest step change.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I agree.
actually, if you ask a lot of people, the older models can do that if you build the right framework to do it. So it's like all things in this space, I think. It starts to
I
push
really
the
like.
level of requirements of down. It just puts it at scale and makes it easier for somebody non-skilled to do these things, which is no
Yeah,
new.
I really like what you said because again, a lot of people do focus on Mythos itself. I think Mythos is more of a model across others. Among others, there are many models that can probably do similar stuff. But all this is highlighting is that we are more and more so in an era of speed, which again doesn't come as a surprise to anyone. We've been ourselves toying with that on the defensive side. It's just becoming increasingly clear, let's say. And there is another thing that you pointed to, David, which kind of reminds us of our discussion last week, where you mentioned that a lot of people assume this leads to mass exploitation, right? Like every single vulnerability on Earth will be exploitable very easily because of AI. Your point, and you kind of mentioned the financial equation today as well, but your point is that from the economic standpoint, this probably doesn't work. I mean, the economics do not support that. Can you maybe explain that for listeners?
Yeah. So if you are talking about the world being hacked overnight, that's not going to happen. Now, with the world of supply chains and stuff, that does make things more complicated because we all rely on certain shared libraries, and these are probably the things that are going to be popped, and then it ripples down. The good old supply chain problem that we have never got really a hold of yet. But ultimately, if you think that someone's going to just sit there in their, their little bunker and push a button and suddenly hack the world. That's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is that targeted attacks suddenly become far more successful, or the potential to be more successful, because you can go, I really want to go after that company there for whatever reason, financial crime, political, whatever. But ultimately, it's that I want to go and do that, and I'm happy to pay the money to do that. And the finances behind how much a token costs and how much it's been discounted by VC now, and over time that investment goes away, so the token costs go up, but all our models get more efficient and our hardware gets better, so those costs come down. So the actual finances are still muddy. They should probably stay about the same. What you're paying for a token now is probably going to be the same in 5 years' time if we're still here. But ultimately, yeah, it's that we're far more likely to see target attack against big organizations or somebody that if you have a certain risk profile, you are going to see you're going to see the number of vulnerabilities coming out of your scanner go up. And that's probably the bigger problem. You're not suddenly going to be attacked through these things, but engineers, software engineers, security engineers everywhere, their workload suddenly goes up because people will just start using it and like saying, oh, there's a vulnerability, oh, there's a vulnerability, oh, there's a vulnerability. And all of them will be logged. That means that we're over, I think in 6 months' time, we'll be getting drowned
Yeah.
in vulnerability reports.
Which is already the case to some degree. I mean, talking to
Oh,
many of our CISO friends or customers, on the vulnerability side, clearly it's already difficult to catch up. And if now your scanners are actually throwing even more alerts, vulnerability alerts at you, it will probably make that even harder to catch up. But there's another thing that you said, which I think is important, especially for the defensive side of things. You've mentioned that attacks will probably become more targeted, maybe better prepared. What do you think this breaks in today's SOC model? Like if we just look at that from the lens of the SOC, what changes as a consequence to this?
So if you don't have a particular risk model, so if you are a normal company, you're not massively high on whatever index your country uses for measuring, the financial markets, and you don't do anything particularly controversial or whizzy or public, then right now your risk level is you expose something of your infrastructure onto the internet that gets picked up by a scanner. So your showdowns, et cetera, you go on there and you find that, hey, who's got this particular type of firewall because I know there is an issue in it. And so the fact that you have that tech, and so as long as you are patching that perimeter devices as quickly as possible, fantastic. The level of risk is low that somebody will come along and do something. You have to essentially make a mistake on the internet that's visible. You hang up a flag that says hack me because you opened the wrong port, you put something vulnerable on the internet. The problem is now those indicators get bigger, faster, because there's so many more of them. So ultimately that you went from as long as you are not special, you're at the least amount of risk because the chance of you having that particular issue and then being flagged up, that Venn diagram, the circles don't cross very much. What happens now is because of all of these shared libraries that are open source, all of the technology that people are going to poke at, your Venn diagram of the what I have versus vulnerabilities, they get pushed together, which means you have to if you maintain the quick clicks, patch it as soon as something comes out, that's the thing that the model starts to break. Vulnerability management becomes much harder if you're just trying to patch everything that appears on the scanner.
Which brings us back to the prioritization framework. I mean, it's becoming... We're clearly moving out of this model of patch everything to a model where you need some sort of strong prioritization because you're getting flooded. As a consequence, you cannot act on everything. And at the same time, there is a risk that anything can be exploitable right now. So you just need to react maybe faster. Again, if we go back to the question, from a SOC perspective, where do you think, I have an opinion on this, but I'm more than curious to get yours, but where do you think that current detection and investigation / remediation response workflows, where do you think that these workflows fall short against that kind of attacker?
At that point, it becomes a scale problem. So, because when you're in a SOC, you're prioritizing signals coming from that external surface, and you don't get that many. You're not because you're patching, because you're uninterested, and you're not actively being attacked. The majority of SOCs on a standard risk scale, you're not seeing much coming in from that outside, and you probably have quite an awareness of what you have and if there's any current issues. Suddenly, everything you have on the perimeter has a potential, which means those often difficult to deal with tickets because suddenly you're going, right, well, how do I deal with it? Am I being just scanned or is there an active attack? Those ones tend to take a bit of time to go and look at, and you're going to get more of them. You're going to get all your external devices get a little more tickled. And you're like, okay, hang on, I now need to respond to far more of my things on the external perimeter. And those ones are the ones where if you get it wrong in a SOC, that can lead to a very bad day for a lot of people. Again, that increases your workload, but the workload that's increased is actually probably your highest stress tickets as well. The ones that are far more likely to be a bigger problem.
Yeah. By the way, I like what you're saying, and I feel like Mythos hasn't really changed that much. It may be pushing for faster change, but it's nothing new on its own. I'll give you an example. A lot of our customers were doing exactly what you said. Obviously, they had some sort of prioritization on the SOC side. So they would look at the most critical alerts first or the most severe cases, and they would, to a certain degree, because they're forced to, they would ignore the lower criticity ones. So informational alerts coming from your EDR or whatever would probably not be looked at. And this has always been a risk, a latent risk to a certain extent. What you're saying is now, because of AI being more widely used on the attacker side, there is no small risk anymore, really, because while you still have to focus, obviously, on the critical ones, there are also this waves of smaller, less critical, at least in appearance, less critical alerts that actually may be important as well. And so scale is becoming the biggest problem. By the way, there's another thing that we are starting to feel and that we're actively working on right now, where we think that investigating alerts individually, especially for the small criticity ones, means that you are probably missing a piece, a large piece. Because most of the time, these are small signals that, if glued together, can reveal a story. But if looked at individually, you
Yeah.
will not have enough data to actually come to any meaningful conclusion. And that's where AI actually can help a lot on the defensive side, because guess what? AI is much better than us humans at one thing in particular, and that's pattern recognition. For us, I mean, it will rarely be the same analyst working on all of that. Analyst obviously is a human, they will forget. And so AI suffers from that a bit less. And so I think that this is clearly one of the pieces where, precisely because of AI used on the attacker side, the AI can actually help as well on the defensive side, because it has this native ability of just gluing things together, if used the right way, with the right architecture, maybe with some graph knowledge behind it, it can yield results.
Yeah, I mean, so if you look at a common setup of SOCs, you are not showing the informational. You're not even bringing it's not that the analyst doesn't go off and look for other tickets on that asset or in that, even that pipeline or potential attack path. It's the fact that we never sent the tickets in because we filtered them out at source to reduce the noise that an analyst was seeing. So the analyst has essentially no chance to be able to do that pattern recognition, because we either give them absolutely everything and then they can't see anything because they can't, like they're drowned in tickets, or you filter it out to only show them the ones that we thought were the most important. But the problem is it's this attack chain type that shows lots of little things. And so, yeah, it's not uncommon for informational things to never. It's not uncommon for lows and mediums to even be dropped, depending on the risk appetite stroke exactly the technology is being used. So yeah, if you're not showing the SOC analyst that because as a human they cannot deal with the information coming in, fair, that's how we've been working to now, then they don't have that ability to ever do that. Like, it's not like the SOC analyst isn't doing their job. You literally never get the information. And so changing that so that you need to change that while adopting AI to be able to do that. Otherwise, you have no chance.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I remember back in the days when we started Kevlar, a lot of people were talking about a future where AI would fight against AI. One on the bad side, the other one on the good side. I feel like we're getting closer and closer to this. But let me come back to something else that you mentioned that I would like to double click on. You said that you essentially believe that this model of patching everything is not the answer. But what that means is there are trade-offs to be made. Because again, if you don't patch anything, that means that you accept some risk of some sort. Hence the notion of prioritization that we discussed. But let's maybe look at that from a budget perspective. Imagine you have to reallocate budget or focus of your teams today. What would you actually deprioritize? And what, on the opposite side, would you double down on because you believe that this is what will fix the issue, or at least this is what will, to quote you, help us exist in 5 years?
Yeah. So we used to, well, so like cybersecurity likes to go through themes, and we do always like to come back to you've got to get the basics right. I mean, that just seems to be that is the recurring theme. But for many years, and I'm in my mind as somebody that was building SOCs and doing incident response programs and stuff, they assume breach. So assume that you can be breached, and then build your processes around that. Now, you don't hear people talking about assume breach much anymore because it's no longer in trend or whatever. But it is the thing that we need to be doing, because if you assume breach, you then have to look at, right, what are my impact radiuses? What's the blast impact of that? What are my critical business processes that I need my business to be able to run or deliver the product or whatever it is that I'm doing? Where are those? And which bits of tech and processes are they reliant on, and build from there. And that's how you build your prioritization, not on a CVSS score, which is a way to determine on a single piece of technology the impact and how that could be compromised, but actually on where does it land on how the attacker is going to get to my crown jewels. So if you are trying to patch everything, if you're trying to do that, then that you can't patch everything, you have to choose. And it's about exposure. It's about exposure and the quickest path to my crown jewels and interrupting my business priority workflows. And so for me, if you're going to give me like 1,000 like patches are required list, I'm going to go, which systems are they on? Where do they lead? And how does that relate to my knowledge of my critical business processes? So If I have to pick and choose, I'm going to pick and choose the stuff that allows my business to continue to run if that goes down. So quite often, if I've got, a whole bunch of patches and some of them are sitting for my corporate website, yeah, fine. Like somebody wants to go and deface my corporate website, that's embarrassing and not great. But I would much rather be answering the questions about that than did the conveyor belts all stop
Mm, mm, mm.
in the factory. So if you're coming down to those levels, there is things that are critical. Now, inside a business, every department thinks they're completely critical, and yes, they sort of are because everybody is a cog in a machine. But finding those critical cogs and the ones that you start with where the utterly critical things are and work your way back. And sometimes those utterly critical things don't lend themselves, or those risks don't lend themselves hugely to somebody with a cyber hat on. Sometimes you actually have to think, no, what's the business critical thing? Because you're going, right, okay, no, this is this. If you look at, so I've done a ton of work with fintechs in the last couple of years. If you are doing e-commerce or fintechs and you're dealing with credit cards, you have to worry about PCI DSS. You have to have that certification, or the fines each month get really interesting. There is like, okay, you must patch all criticals and highs within 30 days. That's the mantra and you have to be able to show that and you're doing that. But there's the other one. The other one is you have to submit every quarter a clean ASV scan. So that's a perimeter scan by a vulnerability management tool of everything in your perimeter. Now, you can't pick and choose. You can't do it separately.
Okay.
So as an enterprise that is running e-commerce or something along those lines, if I have like 30 endpoints, 30 different APIs or websites or whatever coming in, every single one of them needs to be clean of anything that needs to be patched, not on critical and high, but anything above CVSS 4. So that's medium as well. Now, mediums, people will happily drop all the time because they go, no, I'm worrying about the criticals and highs because I know I've got 30 days to do that. But actually, every quarter, you have to have a completely clean scan of your perimeter that includes no mediums, highs, and criticals across as many different systems and tech stacks as you have. Now, if you then look at what does that mean from Mythos point of view, suddenly you're going to have a lot more vulnerabilities being loaded against all different types of tech. That becomes very, very difficult to do, potentially, if you have a bunch of different tech stacks. So if you are a company that's bought other companies and merged bits and pieces in, you might end up having completely different bits of tech. You might be sitting on AWS over there, some on-prem data centers there, or Azure there, and you're running lots of different bits of tech. You need to worry about all of them down to the medium level on your perimeter, and you have to be able to have all of it clean. Now, if your Mythos wave comes along and is producing every 2 days a new medium, high, or critical against a library that's been used in different places,
it's virtually impossible to handle that.
Yeah, and you are not allowed to just say, well, you have 90 days. Every 90 days, you have to have in that 90 days a clean scan of your entire perimeter. That's a hard thing to do. And it's not really about cyber. It's not a huge cybersecurity risk. Yes, having something vulnerable on your perimeter is bad, but a medium like a CVSS 4 that's just crept into CVSS 4, normally people would kick that down the line to the next time we're doing a patch. We'll probably get around to that. Or you go look at it and go, it doesn't affect us because we don't use that bit of the library. We don't use that. SV scans don't care about compensating controls, about the fact you're not using the library. You're not allowed to say, oh, that doesn't affect us because it just has to not to be there. So all of a sudden you've got it becomes there's an interesting problem because the rules that are not, those rules there are not set up for the Mythos either, but we have to comply to them in this part.
Do you think that regulatory bodies are actually looking at that from that angle as well? Do you expect change as a consequence? Do you expect them to say, it's not CVSS 4 anymore, it's 6 because of Mythos, or do you just expect them to go, I don't care?
Well, no, it's not that they don't care. It's the fact that regulations have to take into account and have to work for everybody in that particular stack, like vertical or stack. And at that point, becomes very difficult. And PCI DSS is probably one of the hardest ones to do because that has to cover everyone from Coca-Cola running their e-commerce site to some guy that sells t-shirts out of his basement and just happens to be running his own like Linux box with his web server on it, and technically he has to have PCI to build accept credit card payments. That person should go and use cloud services and move across to that and do that risk. But those things still exist. And so when you look at it, that is such a scale of technologies and capabilities that it's very hard to move those requirements. You have to understand the impact before you can do it. So it's very hard. They are not a quick moving thing for a reason. So they want to make a change. It has to go through a whole bunch of like processes and steps and checks in the industry. So it's difficult for them to react in the way that we can potentially react. You know, we're sitting going, how do we react quickly enough to deal with this? The regulations have so much, have it so much hard. So yeah, there's lots of little random business risks where you sit and going, yeah, I would have said, hey, that medium, it doesn't matter because it doesn't affect us. We don't use that bit, but it comes up on my scan and I can't not get rid of it. So all of a sudden I'm dealing with something that doesn't have a cyber risk. It's a business risk, because I have to have this scan or my business gets fined. So there's not just it's not just going to affect cyber mythos, even if we're just looking at that finding vulnerabilities angle. It's not just about hacking, it's about how it changes everything we do from a regulation and stuff like that. So but everybody's running around going, oh, it's like a skeleton key for my company. I can walk in from outside and go dink and get straight into all the servers. Yes, there are risks there, and the high risk organizations already have to be able to deal with that. But for the common organization, there's less risk of that and more risk of running into these, oh, wait a minute, I've got a regulatory requirement over there. Or my vuln program isn't particularly mature. So it's not uncommon for people not to have great asset lists. And I know that a bunch of people listen to this are laughing, going, yes, nobody has an asset list. You're like, yeah. And I go in with it. Have you got an asset list? And does your asset list have key people on it and key processes and key data on it? And people go, we don't even have an asset list of our laptops. But you need all that stuff to be able to do the blast impact and radius and understand attack paths. So it's.
I love it. I love the example that you just gave, and I couldn't have thought of a better closing to the episode, because indeed it just shows that everything is entangled today, and we all think about Mythos from a strict cybersecurity perspective, but you're absolutely right. Because of regulation, because of business impact, it's actually it can have a much wider blast radius, to quote what you just said, that goes beyond just security, like cybersecurity in the classic sense. But I really very much like what you said in terms of prioritization is becoming the next big thing, because we clearly have to move out of a world where we think we can be in control. We just have to assume that there is latent risk and we need to deal with it faster. Good thing is AI can help with that, but we'll see how that goes. So David, thanks a lot for coming on our show. I've really enjoyed our conversation. And for everyone listening, I hope it gave you a clearer, maybe slightly more nuanced picture of what Mythos actually changes and what may be a bit overblown. But obviously this is something that changes very fast, and we'll stay all together on the hunt for news and for what impact this can have on us. But thanks everyone for tuning in, and we will definitely be back with a new episode. And again, David, it was an amazing episode. Thanks a lot for being with us today.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure. Talk to you soon.